to spend some time on college football because I saw Oregon live for the second time. And I was 3 rows back in Washington. I saw end zone and 40-yard line. Here I was 3 rows away. Really communicative, verbal team. Nix, Lanning, the head coach. Michigan, to me, is the best football team I've seen. Texas is the most physically impressive team I've seen with Georgia. I think this is the best Oregon team I've seen. So I watched Bo Nix. First of all, Oregon had a fumble. It's their first of the year. Nix throws to the right person every single time. Now, whether that's coaching or him is if you told me the 4 teams I would put in today, because I do think Texas will beat Oklahoma if they play again, and Oregon will beat Washington if they play again. Michigan, Georgia, Texas, Oregon feels like
Washington hasn't looked as good since that Oregon game by any means.
No. And Oregon is good on the perimeter, really good in the interior. Washington does not have, and you're seeing this, you can run at Washington, and they don't run. They're not particularly gifted guard, center, guard on their O-line. They have good tackles, and they're not great in their interior. Oregon could use another receiver, one of Washington's 4 that I like, but Washington could use about 3 of Oregon's defensive players in the D-line. Oregon's big. But the 4 teams I've seen that I go, that's different. Michigan, Texas will beat Oklahoma again. By the way, that Kansas upset was not a huge shocker. Kansas is really a dangerous team now. Really good. If you can win at Kansas, you're really good. But I watched Oregon again, John, and they went into Utah. And that thing was, that first drive was just boom, 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 touchdown. Crowd went silent. It was, and Utah, you don't go into Utah much and physically push around Utah. Oregon did.
Would you say that game was over basically by the end of the first quarter? I mean, you never want to count Utah out, but it was just
crowd was, and I was sitting among the crowd, and you could, the people I was sitting next to, it was like, whoa, like it was kind of a reality check. They'd played USC, Utah came down to earth. Oregon's just
well, it's
really
part of the
impressive.
reason we were kind of shitting on USC last week is this quarterback's not any good, and Oregon made him look like, a third string pig farmer, right? I mean, they had no chance.
Yep,
I'm with you. I think Washington, I watched a lot of the Washington-Stanford game. They got very lucky. I mean, a kid dropped a pass late. Washington does not.
Yep.
Obviously, they threw the kitchen sink, won that game at home. I think it's fair to say from a gambling standpoint, Oregon will be favored in that rematch. To me, Michigan, I just wonder, is it how weird this thing is going to get the conversation? Because their team, clearly, if the scandal wasn't going on about this guy sending people to all these other games, I mean, every day a new story's coming out that they fed South Carolina, just is anyone going to get in trouble during the season beside them getting rid of this guy? That's not really how the NCAA works, but they're clearly the best. Hard for me to trust Texas. That would be my thing, because if you just told me that Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, or whoever was the coach of that roster, you might pick them to win the national championship. Right. But, Sark just hasn't proven it. I mean, it's just so even that Oklahoma game, which Oklahoma might be a little fool's gold. They could have lost 2 weeks ago to UCF. They were kind of getting worked in that game against Kansas. The other thing is, to me, Oregon State lost. Oregon's direction now to win this conference and be right there. You said it, I think, after the Washington game. Do you trust Bo Nix? They put a stat right when that game started, and a lot of this is that COVID year. Every player got an extra season. No players ever started and played in as many college games as Bo Nix. So we often said this forever about BYU. They always had like 23, 24-year-olds. They do have a big advantage just in terms of the reps this kid had in the SEC, in the tough part of the conference, right, in that division, and now 2 straight years in Oregon. Every game has mattered. That is a huge plus. But as a player, if they get in a tight game, can he consistently make the throws against a Texas, against a Georgia, against a Michigan? That would be my only question why they couldn't win the national championship.
And I think the answer is yes. So I've watched him play in Seattle and Utah. Not for a second in either game was he rattled. And he played from behind in Seattle. Decisive, accurate. He's Derek Carr, but I think a more natural thrower. It's a really easy effort for him. Now, it could be coaches, but he throws to the right person every time. Oregon makes no mistakes. Very few penalties, no fumbles, no interceptions. So I think Bo Nix, to me, is not a guy that is And we see this in pro football where he plays great with a run game and a head. When I watched them in Seattle, my takeaway is Michael Penix is a better NFL prospect. Bo Nix is a really elite college quarterback with a ton of experience. Listen, we've all had fender benders in our life. Sometimes it's even more serious. But even if it's somebody else's mistake, you can lean on Morgan & Morgan. It's the nation's largest injury law firm. 100 offices and over 800 lawyers. With over $15 billion, that's a $1 billion recovered, Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting for you to get full and fair compensation. Submit an injury claim with Morgan & Morgan. It's really, really easy. It's almost like a quarterback, an offensive head coach, and a GM that gets some good weapons makes their life easier. We all need somebody, good or bad days, to make our life a little easier. That's what Morgan & Morgan does. If you're ever injured, check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/Colin or dial pound LAW, that's pound 529 from your cell phone. This is a paid advertisement.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I know people were torn on him last year, and a lot has to do. Do you know what's fascinating about scouting now is talking to these guys. You talk to the former staff at a school, and usually sometimes it ends negatively. Sometimes they got fired because the guy transferred or whatever. And then he goes to a new place, and then everyone loves him. It's really hard. Now, this guy doesn't have any character concerns or whatever, but just really trying to get to the bottom of a player with all this movement, I know for the scouts out there, can be difficult to just truly gauge the write-up on the individual because you have so many people with so many different opinions. These guys play in multiple Power 5 schools. You get one negative thing, one positive thing, and he's a fascinating case study because I would say most people in the SEC thought very underwhelming, not very good player. And you look back and you go, well, Auburn was kind of a disaster. Brian Harsin got run out of town.
Yes.
So actually it might have had little to do with him. It might have been all on the program, right? So that's kind of what you have to balance because this couldn't have gone much better over these last couple of years for him. He went from being, to me, not an NFL player at all to a guy who's going to be talked about as like a top 50 prospect headed into this draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Caleb is still, I mean, USC's got lots of problems. Caleb's going 1. Yeah, Drake May's probably going 2 or 3. Harrison may go 2, depending on who drafts. And then I think Penix feels like the 3rd. I saw Penix play Bo Nix. Now, Penix has better receivers, but it was hard not to be impressed. Lanky, lefty, accurate.
Accuracy on the deep ball,
sits in the pocket. Yeah, but I think Bo Nix then falls into a group late first round because this is also a great offensive tackle class, very good receiver class, excellent DN class, excellent corner class. So I think Bo Nix is going to be in that sort of somewhere between at 20. Like I'm trying to think who would just miss the playoffs. You know, it would be kind of like a Minnesota would move up 6 spots or something to get a Bo Nix. He's got a little Kirk Cousins, although again, having watched them twice on the road, it matters. You know, at Autzen, everything's easy. You go to Utah and we'll see.
I mean, more gifted Brock Purdy, right? He's a little bigger movement wise.
But
I'm just saying about a guy that a lot of college starts who's just going to be arrow trending up. Obviously, quarterback inflation. I know your Trojans, though. You probably didn't have on your bingo card 50-49 at Memorial Stadium.
Well, you know, when I look at USC, they're not great defensively. They're not Michigan, Texas. They're not a top 8 defensive team. They're not this bad. You've seen this in your life. A coordinator can make Matt Ryan an MVP. A defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn, changes everything. Like, you give them the right defensive staff, they're okay. But Alex Grinch is, you know, and this happens. He's just not a coordinator. Forget head coach. Yeah. He's not a coordinator. He's a position coach who at Washington State, you know, a lot of times guys can work at smaller schools because, you know, the athletes, they work well with non-star athletes. Washington State guy. Brady Hoke is great coaching down in a smaller school. You bring him with 4- and 5-star guys at Michigan, they don't buy Brady Hoke. They don't buy his, right? Alex Grinch with like LA kids, they just don't buy him. He comes across he's not alpha. He's not defiant. He looks at times on the sidelines. I mean, you'll see these moments with him. He just doesn't even look like an elite coach. Like Clay Helton with his mouth open on the sidelines. You're like, this guy's not a head coach at USC. And I think with Alex Grinch, he's the classic coach who works well at a smaller school, but you put stars around him, it doesn't work. They're getting worse every
But this is one of the
weekend.
benefits to coaching at a place like USC. Look at Ryan Day. Last couple of years, defense fall off. You have an unlimited budget. Go find the guy that you want, pay him $1.5 million, and your defense immediately improves. When you're at USC, when you're at Alabama, when you're at Ohio State, you can have the pick of the litter because of the amount of money that you can pay a coordinator. Now, this gets back to what I've said about Lincoln forever. The Mike Leach kind of philosophical beliefs is how he's wired. Does he know who to pick as a defensive coordinator? Because let's face it, what was the connection to this guy? Obviously, Leach had him at Washington State. And that I'm sure that was a connection where he started following this guy's career and knowing about him. So it's not, Saban, his pick of the litter is NFL, college, the whole umbrella. He's just going after the cream of the crop, whoever he thinks is the best. And he can get what he got denied by DuBois' guy last year, but that's who he wanted, right? He just wouldn't take the job. Don't totally blame him. Stay with Penix. But that's who he went after. Is Lincoln truly going after the guy that everyone else would want? Or is he going after a guy, maybe there's a connection through this air raid, Cliff knows him, and that's what gets nervous, because the only way to win at the highest level, think about some of Pete's early staffs, right? Norm Chow, Sark, Lane, some of the guys. He's the defensive guy. Him and Kenny Norton could recruit and handle that, right? But his offensive staff was full of all these innovative young guys with some older guys, NFL experience. That's when, and obviously the talent on the field spoke for itself, but the coaching in that meeting room in like 04, 05, and 06 was, I mean, just anyone listening, just go back and Google some of those staffs. And you look at Lincoln's, defensive staff, you're like, does he have the capability to find whoever his, equivalent of a D'Amico Ryan or whatever in college? I don't know. I think that's going to be the biggest question mark by far, because Caleb leaves. Lincoln's proven he can find quarterbacks. This is the least of his worries, right?
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point. Is right now he has been a connection coach, right? And by the way, who followed him, who didn't? Some of the coaches that didn't follow him, were veteran people that, not that they didn't like him, but it tells you, when you leave a place, who follows you and who doesn't. So it's just a really bad, Grinch is over his head. It's a really bad defensive staff. Dante Williams in the secondary is a recruiter. Nobody thinks he's a great coach. He's a great recruiter. By the way, every college staff in the country has a guy that can recruit who's not a great, what you would call schematic coach. So they got some issues. I think they can solve a lot with a better DC. I don't think the D personnel's this awful, but we'll see. Okay, Chargers, Bears. It's going to be awful.
Yeah,
Chargers. Brandon Staley should be able to win this thing. Cross our fingers on this, John. Good seeing you.
You think, Colin. Have a good week. Talk to you soon.